He said, "Did you really think I loved you? No man likes older women. I want a divorce and half your assets." Those words still echo in my mind, but now they make me smile instead of cry. Because what Derek didn't know in that moment, what he couldn't have possibly imagined, was that I had been recording every single conversation we'd had for the past 2 weeks. Every cruel laugh, every manipulation, every lie that spilled from his lips was captured on my phone, tucked safely in my pocket. I was standing in our kitchen. Well, my kitchen, since it was my house he'd moved into after our whirlwind romance, watching this man I thought I'd married tear off his mask completely. 14 days. That's how long our marriage lasted before he showed me who he really was. 14 days of blissful ignorance before reality came crashing down like a sledgehammer to glass. "Did you really think I loved you, Beverly?" he continued, his voice dripping with disgust as he looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "You're 63 years old. What man in his right mind would choose an old woman when he could have someone young and beautiful?" The recording device in my pocket captured every word, every inflection, every ounce of venom he was spitting at me. But here's what Derek didn't understand about women like me. Women who've lived through decades of life's punches, who've built businesses from nothing, who've survived loss and betrayal before. We don't break that easily. We bend, we adapt, and sometimes we plot. I just smiled and said, "You're absolutely right, Derek. No man would." His face lit up with satisfaction, thinking he'd won some great victory. Poor fool had no idea he'd just handed me everything I needed to destroy him completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how sweet this moment of revelation truly was, you need to know how we got here. You need to know how a successful businesswoman like me, someone who'd spent 40 years reading people and making million-dollar decisions, could fall for such an obvious con. So let me take you back to where this whole mess began, 3 months earlier. 3 months earlier, I was living my perfectly ordered life in my perfectly maintained home in suburban Connecticut. My name is Beverly Richardson, and at 63, I thought I had figured out exactly who I was and what I wanted from my remaining years on this earth. I'd been widowed for 8 years, had built my late husband's small accounting firm into a thriving financial consulting business, and had settled into what I thought was a comfortable routine of work, book club with my friend Patricia, and quiet evenings at home. That's when Derek Walsh walked into Murphy's coffee shop on that Tuesday morning in September. I'd been sitting in my usual corner booth, reading the Wall Street Journal and sipping my usual black coffee, when this tall, handsome man in his 40s approached my table. He had that salt and pepper hair that some men wear so well, kind blue eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "I couldn't help but notice you're reading about the Peterson merger. I work in finance myself, and I have to say, that's a brilliant analysis they've done. Mind if I sit? It's so rare to find someone who actually understands market dynamics." I should have trusted my instincts right then. In 40 years of business, I'd learned that when someone starts a conversation by complimenting your intelligence, they usually want something from you. But I was lonely. God help me, I was so terribly lonely. And this attractive man was showing genuine interest in not just me, but my thoughts, my opinions, my expertise. We talked for 2 hours that morning. He told me he was a financial advisor who'd recently moved to town after his divorce. He spoke passionately about helping people plan for their futures, about the satisfaction of seeing clients achieve their dreams. He asked thoughtful questions about my business, seemed genuinely impressed by what I'd accomplished. When he asked if he could take me to dinner that weekend, I found myself saying yes before my rational brain could intervene. Patricia, my best friend since college and the only person whose opinion I truly valued, was skeptical from the start. "Beverly," she said when I called to tell her about my coffee shop encounter, "a 43-year-old man doesn't just randomly approach a 63-year-old woman in a coffee shop to discuss stock mergers. That's not how the world works." "Maybe he's just mature," I argued. "Maybe he values intelligence and conversation over other things. Honey. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. I love you like a sister, but we both know that's not how men think, especially men that age. What do you really know about this Derek? The truth was, I knew very little. But over the next few weeks, as Derek and I began seeing each other regularly, I learned what he wanted me to learn. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my life story. He brought me flowers, opened doors, and listened, really listened, when I spoke. When I told him about my husband's death, about the loneliness I'd carried for 8 years, he held my hand and said he understood because he'd felt that same emptiness after his divorce. He was everything I'd forgotten I wanted in a partner. He made me laugh, challenged me intellectually, and most importantly, he made me feel young again. For the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to getting dressed each morning, wondering what we'd talk about over dinner, feeling that flutter of anticipation that I thought had died with my husband. It was intoxicating. It was perfect. It was completely fake. But I didn't know that then. All I knew was that after 8 years of going to bed alone and waking up alone, someone was interested in my thoughts, my dreams, my future. Someone wanted to build something with me. When Derek started staying over on weekends, when he suggested we take a trip together to Martha's Vineyard, when he began talking about our future and growing old together, I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. Hey, before we continue, I need to warn you, if you watch this video but don't subscribe to this channel, YouTube might think you didn't like the story and simply stop showing you our next videos. So, click subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. The proposal came on a crisp October evening as we walked along the beach in Martha's Vineyard. Derek had planned everything perfectly. The sunset, the champagne picnic, even the photographer hidden in the dunes to capture the moment. When he dropped to one knee and pulled out that beautiful diamond ring, telling me I was the love of his life, and he couldn't imagine facing the future without me, I cried tears of pure joy. Beverly Richardson, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you've given me hope again. You've shown me what real love looks like. Will you marry me? Through my tears, all I could say was yes. Yes to love, yes to companionship, yes to not spending the rest of my life alone. Yes to this man who seemed to see me, really see me, in a way no one had since my husband died. We set the date for December, just 2 months away. Derek said he didn't want to wait, that at our age we shouldn't waste time with long engagements. I agreed, caught up in the romance of it all. Patricia continued to express concerns, but I dismissed them as the worries of a woman who'd never found love herself. You're just being cautious, I told her. I know it seems fast, but when you know, you know. And I know Derek loves me. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I ignored. How Derek never wanted me to meet his friends or family. How he was always vague about his work, never giving me specifics about his clients or his office. How he gradually began asking questions about my finances. Innocent questions at first, about retirement planning and investment strategies, but questions nonetheless. I can see how he slowly began isolating me from Patricia and my other friends, always having conflicting plans when they wanted to get together, always finding reasons why we should spend time alone instead. How he started making subtle comments about my age, my appearance, my habits. Nothing cruel, just gentle suggestions that maybe I should try a different hairstyle. Or perhaps those clothes were a bit too formal for someone retired. But I was in love. I was planning a wedding. I was imagining holidays with his family, lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper together, growing old with someone who cared about me. I was living in a beautiful dream, and I refused to let anyone wake me up. The wedding was small and elegant, held in the garden of our local country club. I wore a simple but expensive cream-colored dress. Derek looked handsome in his navy suit. And for a few hours, everything felt perfect. Patricia was there, of course, still worried but supportive. A few neighbors, some colleagues from work, Derek's cousin from Boston who seemed nice enough but somehow hollow when you really looked at him. As we exchanged vows, as Derek looked into my eyes and promised to love and cherish me for the rest of our lives, I truly believed we were beginning our happily ever after. The photographer captured every moment, our first dance, the champagne toast, Derek feeding me wedding cake while I laughed. I have those pictures now, and they're almost painful to look at because my joy was so genuine, so complete. Our honeymoon was a week in Napa Valley, staying at exclusive bed and breakfasts and touring wineries. Derek was the perfect husband, attentive, romantic, constantly telling me how lucky he was to have found me. We talked about the future, about maybe traveling to Europe in the spring, about redecorating the house to make it feel like ours instead of just mine. But even during those magical 7 days, there were moments that should have alerted me to what was coming. The way Derek studied the expensive wine collection at one vineyard a little too intently. How he casually asked our tour guide about the value of certain bottles. The morning I found him on my laptop, claiming he was just checking his email, but quickly closing whatever he'd been looking at when I entered the room. "Just boring work stuff, sweetheart," he said with that charming smile. "Nothing for you to worry about." I should have worried. God, I should have worried about everything. When we returned from our honeymoon, Derek suggested we sit down and combine our lives properly. He'd prepared what he called a comprehensive financial overview, spreadsheets detailing my assets, my investments, my property values. He'd clearly done extensive research while I'd been floating on cloud nine, believing in our fairy tale romance. "I think we should consolidate our accounts," he said, spreading the papers across my dining room table like he was conducting a business meeting. "It'll be easier to manage our finances as a team. I can take care of all this boring paperwork stuff so you can focus on enjoying your retirement." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Derek, I'm not retired. I still run my business." He waved his hand dismissively. "Well, of course, but at our age, shouldn't we be thinking about slowing down? You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve to relax and let someone else handle the details." The someone else, of course, being him. I stalled, making excuses about needing to consult with my accountant and my lawyer before making any major financial changes. Derek seemed understanding, but I noticed how his jaw tightened just slightly when I didn't immediately agree to his suggestions. Over the next few days, his behavior began to shift in subtle ways. The compliments became less frequent, replaced by small criticisms delivered with a concerned smile. My cooking was interesting, but maybe too heavy for people our age. My choice of television shows was a bit lowbrow for someone of my education. My business practices were old-fashioned, and probably not as profitable as they could be with some modern updates. Each comment was wrapped in care, delivered as if he was just looking out for my best interests. But they accumulated like tiny cuts, each one designed to make me doubt myself, to make me more dependent on his approval and guidance. Patricia noticed the change immediately when we met for lunch on day 12 of my marriage. "Beverly, you seem different," she said, studying my face across the table. "You look tired." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I insisted, though even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. "Marriage is just an adjustment, that's all. Derek has some ideas about how we could streamline things, make life easier." "What kind of ideas?" I found myself reluctant to share the details, which should have been another warning sign. When you can't comfortably discuss your relationship with your best friend, something is fundamentally wrong. "Just financial stuff," I said vaguely. "Combining accounts, that sort of thing." Patricia's expression grew serious. "Beverly, promise me you'll talk to your lawyer before you sign anything. Promise me." I promised. But I could tell she didn't believe I would follow through. The truth was, I was beginning to feel like I was disappointing everyone. Patricia with her constant worry, Derek with my reluctance to trust him completely. I was caught between two people I cared about, and it was exhausting. That evening, Derek brought up the financial arrangements again, but this time his tone was less patient. Beverly, I'm starting to feel like you don't trust me, he said, his voice carrying a hurt that seemed genuine. We're married now. We're supposed to be partners, but you're treating me like some kind of threat instead of your husband. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. Here was this man who claimed to love me, who'd married me, who was trying to help make our lives easier, and I was behaving like a paranoid old woman. I do trust you, I said quickly. I'm just not used to sharing these decisions with someone else. Give me a little more time to adjust. He softened then, taking my hands in his and looking at me with those kind blue eyes that had first drawn me in. Of course, darling, I understand. Take all the time you need. I just want us to build a real life together. That night, as I lay awake next to my new husband, I made a decision that nearly cost me everything. I decided to stop being so suspicious, to stop listening to Patricia's concerns, to start trusting the man I'd married. I decided to be a good wife. It was the worst decision of my life. But it was also, in a strange way, the best decision I ever made. Because what Derek didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that I had one ally he'd never considered, one person who'd been watching and waiting and planning from the very beginning. Patricia had hired Detective Monroe 3 days after my wedding. And by day 12 of my marriage, Detective Monroe had uncovered Derek's entire history of targeting wealthy widows, his pattern of quick marriages followed by financial devastation, and most importantly, he'd identified Derek's previous victims, women just like me who'd been left emotionally and financially destroyed by this man's calculated cruelty. Patricia had been quietly building a case against Derek while I'd been living in blissful ignorance. She'd gathered evidence, documented his lies, and prepared for the moment when Derek would inevitably reveal his true intentions. That moment came on day 14. We were having breakfast, just a quiet Tuesday morning that I thought would be like any other. Derek seemed agitated, checking his phone constantly and barely touching his coffee. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, completely devoid of the warmth I'd grown accustomed to. "Beverly," he said, his voice flat and businesslike, "we need to talk." Something in his tone made my blood freeze. This wasn't the man who'd been gently pressuring me about financial arrangements. This wasn't even the man who'd been making small criticisms wrapped in concern. This was someone else entirely. "I think it's time we stop pretending," he continued. "This marriage has served its purpose, and now I need to move on to the next phase." "I don't understand," I said, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the laugh of someone who'd been acting in a play and was innally free to drop the pretense. "Oh, Beverly," he said, shaking his head as if I was a particularly slow child. "Did you really think I loved you? Did you actually believe that a man like me would choose an old woman like you if there wasn't something in it for me?" The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain still, to keep my expression neutral. My phone was in my pocket, and I'd learned to start the recording app without looking. A skill I'd picked up during business negotiations when I needed to protect myself from clients who might later claim I'd said things I hadn't. "You're 63 years old, Beverly," Derek continued, his voice growing crueler with each word. "Your skin is wrinkled, your body is sagging, and you're going to keep getting older and more pathetic every single day. What man in his right mind would choose that when he could have someone young and beautiful?" I touched the record button through my pocket fabric, praying the phone would pick up his voice clearly. "No man likes older women, Beverly. We tolerate them when we have to, but we don't love them. We can't love them. You're past your expiration date, and deep down, you know it." Each word was designed to cut, to wound, to make me feel as small and worthless as possible. And it was working. Even knowing what Patricia had warned me about, even having my own suspicions, hearing it said so bluntly, so cruelly, was devastating. "So here's what's going to happen," Derek said, pulling out his phone and showing me what appeared to be a divorce application he'd already filled out. "I want a divorce, and I want half of everything you own." The house, the business, the investments, all of it. Connecticut is a no-fault divorce state, so I'm entitled to half of all marital assets. You can either agree to this now and make it easy, or you can fight it and make it expensive. But either way, I'm getting what I came for. What you came for, I repeated slowly. Of course. Did you think this was some great love story? Did you think I spent 3 months pretending to be interested in your boring stories and your pathetic attempts at romance because I actually cared about you? He stood up and began pacing, clearly enjoying his moment of revelation. Beverly, you were a mark from the moment I saw you in that coffee shop. A lonely old widow with money and no family to protect her. It was almost too easy. A few compliments, some flowers, and you were ready to hand over your entire life to a stranger. The recording was capturing every word, every cruel laugh, every admission of fraud. But more than that, it was capturing something Derek didn't even realize he was giving me. Detailed descriptions of his methods, his TI malign, his systematic approach to targeting women like me. I've done this before, you know, he said, clearly proud of his accomplishments. Amanda in Florida lasted 6 months before she figured it out, but by then I'd already transferred most of her assets. Sarah in Arizona was even easier. She actually thanked me for taking care of her finances while I was bleeding her dry. He was giving me names, locations, a complete confession of his criminal activities. And he was so confident in his control over me, so certain that I was just another defeated victim, that he didn't even consider the possibility that I might be documenting his admissions. The beauty of targeting widows your age, Derek continued, is that you're all so desperate for companionship, so grateful for any male attention, that you'll ignore obvious warning signs. You want to believe in love so badly that you'll hand over everything to the first man who pays attention to you. I felt tears streaming down my face, but I kept the recording going. Every sob, every cruel observation, every detail of his systematic abuse was being preserved. So, what's it going to be, Beverly? Are you going to sign the divorce papers like a good girl, or am I going to have to make this uglier than it needs to be? That's when I surprised him. I laughed, not the bitter laugh of someone who'd been broken, but a genuine laugh of someone who'd just realized they held all the cards in a game their opponent didn't even know they were playing. "Oh, Derek," I said, wiping my tears and smiling at his confused expression. "You have no idea how much trouble you're in." "What are you talking about?" I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held it up, showing him the recording app that had been running for the past 20 minutes. "I'm talking about the fact that I've just recorded a complete confession of wire fraud, marriage fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. I'm talking about the fact that you just admitted to victimizing multiple women across multiple states, which makes this a federal crime." Derek's face went white. "You can't. That's not legal. You can't record someone without their consent." "Actually, Derek, Connecticut is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows about the recording, which I do, it's completely admissible in court." I stood up slowly, savoring the look of dawning horror on his face. "But here's the really beautiful part," I continued. "I've been recording every conversation we've had for the past 2 weeks, ever since my friend Patricia's private investigator finished his report on your background." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That's right, sweetheart. I know about Amanda Morrison in Jacksonville, who lost her entire retirement savings to your previous marriage scam. I know about Sarah Chen in Phoenix, who had to sell her house because you drained her investment accounts. I know about Jennifer Walsh in Portland. Oh yes, I know you've been using different last names, who ended up in therapy for 2 years after you destroyed her financially and emotionally." I walked over to my laptop and opened it, showing Derek the screen filled with Detective Monroe's comprehensive report. "I know that your real name is Derek Paulson, not Derek Walsh. I know that you've never worked as a financial advisor, that the references you gave me were fake, and that you've been running this particular con for at least 5 years across 7 different states." Derek tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I also know that you're currently wanted for questioning in Georgia regarding the suspicious death of Margaret Thornton, an 80-year-old widow who died 3 weeks after marrying you and conveniently left everything to her loving husband in a will she'd never written before meeting you. That accusation hit him like a sledgehammer. His face went from white to gray, and he actually staggered backward. I didn't. Margaret died of natural causes. Her heart that had been perfectly healthy according to her doctor, until she started complaining of fatigue and nausea during your brief marriage. The same symptoms that Amanda and Sarah both reported during their marriages to you. I was guessing about the symptoms, but Derek's expression told me I was right on target. Now, I said, settling back into my chair, let me tell you what's really going to happen. In about 10 minutes, Detective Harris from the Connecticut State Police is going to arrive with a warrant for your arrest. In about an hour, FBI Agent Rodriguez is going to arrive to discuss your activities across state lines. And in about a week, you're going to be sitting in a federal courthouse explaining to a judge why you thought you could build a career out of destroying vulnerable women. Derek's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his chair. Beverly, please, we can work this out. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. We can just annul the marriage. Oh, Derek, I said, feeling genuinely sorry for him for the first time since I'd known him. You still don't understand. This was never about punishing you, though that's certainly going to happen. This was about stopping you. I pulled out a folder that Patricia had prepared for me, filled with contact information for Derek's previous victims. You see, Amanda and Sarah and Jennifer and 4 other women whose lives you've destroyed are all very interested in testifying against you. They've been waiting for someone to build a strong enough case to ensure you'd actually face consequences for what you've done to them. But why? Derek's voice was barely a whisper. Why would you put yourself through this? Why would you marry me if you knew? That was the question I'd been waiting for. Because, Derek, some traps require bait. And sometimes, the only way to catch a predator is to let him think he's caught prey. The sound of car doors slamming outside announced the arrival of Detective Harris, right on schedule. You used my loneliness against me. I continued as footsteps approached the front door. You calculated that I was so desperate for love that I'd overlook obvious warning signs. You thought I was just another pathetic old woman who would be grateful for whatever scraps of affection you were willing to throw my way. The doorbell rang. But what you never considered, Derek, is that some of us pathetic old women have spent decades learning how to spot liars, manipulators, and con artists. Some of us have built successful businesses by reading people and recognizing threats. And some of us have friends loyal enough to hire private investigators when they're worried about our welfare. I walked to the front door and opened it to find Detective Harris and Agent Rodriguez standing on my porch. Mrs. Richardson? Detective Harris asked. We understand you have some evidence you'd like to share with us. I handed them my phone with the recording still running and Derek's confession echoing clearly from the speaker. Everything you need is right here, I said, including admissions to previous crimes and references to other victims. As they entered my house and approached Derek, who was now slumped in his chair looking like a broken man, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not satisfaction or revenge, but pure relief that this nightmare was finally over. Derek Paulson, Detective Harris said, pulling out handcuffs. You're under arrest for wire fraud, marriage fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and emotional recovery. Derek's arrest made national news when the FBI investigation uncovered a network of marriage scammers targeting older women across the country. It turned out he wasn't working alone. There was an entire organization of men who specialized in identifying wealthy widows and systematically destroying their lives. I testified at Derek's trial, along with 6 other women whose lives he'd devastated. The recordings I'd made were the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, but it was the testimony of his victims that really sealed his fate. One by one, we stood up in that courtroom and described how this man had targeted our loneliness, exploited our hopes, and stolen not just our money, but our ability to trust. Amanda Morrison, the woman from Florida, was particularly powerful in her testimony. She described how Derek had convinced her to cash out her retirement savings to invest in a fake business venture, leaving her with nothing at age 71. Sarah Chen told the court about the psychological abuse that accompanied the financial theft, the constant criticism, the isolation from friends and family, the systematic destruction of her self-esteem. But the most heartbreaking testimony came from Jennifer Walsh in Portland, who described how Derek had convinced her to sign over power of attorney to him, then had her committed to a psychiatric facility when she began asking questions about missing money. She spent 3 months in institutional care while Derek sold her house and emptied her accounts. Derek was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The judge called his crimes a systematic campaign of emotional and financial terrorism against vulnerable women, and noted that the psychological damage he'd inflicted was often more devastating than the financial losses. The civil suits were equally satisfying. Between the criminal restitution orders and the civil judgments, Derek's victims recovered most of their losses from his seized assets and the assets of his criminal associates. More importantly, the publicity from the case led to increased awareness about romance scams targeting older adults and resulted in new legislation protecting seniors from financial exploitation. As for me, I emerged from the experience changed but not broken. The marriage was annulled, of course, and I kept every penny of my assets, plus a substantial settlement from Derek's criminal enterprise. But more than that, I gained something I hadn't expected, a sense of purpose I'd been missing since my husband died. Patricia and I founded the Richardson Foundation for Senior Protection, an organization dedicated to educating older adults about romance scams and providing support for victims of financial exploitation. We work with law enforcement agencies across the country to identify and prosecute predators like Derek, and we've helped dozens of other women recover from similar experiences. The foundation has become my full-time focus now, and it's the most meaningful work I've ever done. Every time we help someone avoid a scam, every time we help a victim recover their losses, every time we put another predator behind bars, I remember why I went through that awful experience with Derek. I still date occasionally, though I'm much more cautious now. I've learned to trust my instincts, to listen to my friends' concerns, and to take my time getting to know someone before letting them into my life. The loneliness that made me vulnerable to Derek's manipulation is still there sometimes, but I've found better ways to address it, through meaningful work, deep friendships, and self-respect. Looking back, I can see that Derek did teach me something valuable, though certainly not what he intended. He taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, that I'm capable of fighting back against people who try to use my vulnerabilities against me, and that sometimes the best way to heal from being victimized is to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. The recordings I made of Derek's confession are now used in training seminars for law enforcement officers, social workers, and elder care advocates. His cruel words about pathetic old women and expired older adults are played in courtrooms across the country as evidence in similar cases. The voice that once made me cry with its cruelty now helps protect other women from experiencing the same pain. There's a certain poetic justice in that. Derek sends me letters from prison sometimes, though I don't open them anymore. Patricia handles all correspondence related to the ongoing civil suits and criminal appeals. I'm told he claims to have found religion, that he's sorry for what he did, that he wants to make amends. But I've learned that predators like Derek are experts at saying whatever they think people want to hear, and I have no interest in providing him with another opportunity to practice his manipulation skills. The house feels like home again now that his presence has been completely erased. I redecorated completely, removing every trace of our brief marriage and filling the space with things that make me happy. Art from local artists, photographs of friends and family, books that I actually want to read. The dining room where he spread out his financial documents and tried to take control of my life now houses my foundation's files, evidence of all the good that came from that terrible experience. I sleep well at night now, secure in the knowledge that I'm not a victim, but a survivor. And more than that, I'm someone who turned her pain into purpose, her vulnerability into strength, her near destruction into a force for protecting others. 6 months ago, I received a letter from Amanda Morrison in Florida. She'd used the settlement money from Derek's conviction to start a new business, a consulting firm that helps other women start over after financial devastation. She wrote that meeting me and the other victims had shown her she wasn't alone, and that turning Derek in had been the first step in reclaiming her life. That letter reminded me why I'd been willing to risk everything to stop Derek. It wasn't really about revenge, though I'd certainly enjoyed seeing him face consequences for his actions. It was about refusing to let him continue destroying lives, about using my own experience to protect other women from going through what I'd endured. In the end, Derek was wrong about almost everything. He was wrong about older women being easy targets who would be grateful for any attention. He was wrong about me being too lonely and desperate to see through his lies. He was wrong about my willingness to hand over my life to someone who didn't deserve it. But most of all, he was wrong about women like me being powerless. Because the truth is, women who've lived long enough to be widowed, who've built businesses and raised families and survived decades of life's challenges, aren't weak prey waiting to be devoured. We're experienced, resourceful, and dangerous when we need to be. We know how to recognize threats, how to gather allies, and how to fight back when someone tries to destroy us. Derek learned that lesson the hard way, and he's spending the next 25 years thinking about it in a federal prison cell. And me? I'm living my best life, doing meaningful work, surrounded by people who truly care about me, and secure in the knowledge that I can handle whatever challenges come my way. The woman who fell for Derek's lies was lonely and vulnerable and desperate for love. The woman who destroyed his criminal career is confident, purposeful, and surrounded by genuine affection from people who value her for who she really is, not what they can steal from her. It turns out that was always who I really was. I just needed to be reminded. And you? What would you do if you were in my place? Do you think I went too far with anything? Comment below and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Thank you for staying with me until the end.